In this video, we'll take a high-level look at the Graduate Record Examination, also known as the GRE. We'll examine what the test is, the question types found on the GRE, and the scores that you'll receive. Let's begin with what the test is. Put simply, the GRE is a standardized test designed to predict one's readiness for graduate-level studies. In particular, the test measures one's verbal reasoning, mathematical reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing skills. Now, in most countries, the GRE is a computer-based test that can be taken most days throughout the year. In countries without the required computer network, the GRE is offered as a paper-based test. Okay, now let's look at the various parts that make up the GRE. When you write this test, your first task will be to complete the analytical writing section. In this section, you must write 2 different essays. The first essay type is called Analysis of an Issue. For this essay, you will have 30 minutes to explain and defend your point of view on a given issue. The other essay type is called Analysis of an Argument. For this essay, you will be given an argument, and you will have 30 minutes to write a critique of that argument. Now we'll examine the writing tasks in much greater detail in the Analytical Writing Lesson module. Moving along, following the 2 essay tasks, you'll begin working on the quantitative and verbal measures of the test. To this end, you will complete 2 quantitative sections and 2 verbal sections with 20 questions per section. Now, the quantitative and verbal sections are both section-level adaptive. So, for example, if you perform well on the first verbal section, the second verbal section will feature questions at a higher level of difficulty. Conversely, if you struggle with the first verbal section, then the second verbal section will feature questions at a lower level of difficulty. The same applies to the 2 quantitative sections. Given the adaptive nature of the GRE, some students will encounter a lot of very difficult questions, and others will encounter easier questions. So once you've completed all of the sections, your scaled quantitative and verbal scores will be based on the difficulty level of the questions you answered correctly. Now, in addition to 2 quantitative sections and 2 verbal sections, there will also be a 5th unscored section that can be quantitative or verbal. The test makers include this section so that they can gauge the difficulty level of each question, which will later help them determine the GRE scores of future test takers. Now, as its name suggests, the unscored section does not count towards any of your scores. However, the unscored section is not identified as such. In other words, you will not know which section is the unscored section. So, following the 2 essays in the analytical writing section, the 5 math and verbal sections can appear in any order. So on test day, your test could look something like this, or like this, or like this, and so on. Since it's impossible to determine whether or not a section is an unscored section, it's crucial that you treat each section as though it counts. In other words, put your best effort towards completing every section. Now, it's also important to note that on rare occasions, some test takers will not get an unscored section. In these situations, they will receive a clearly marked research section at the very end of the test. As with the unscored section, the research section will not count towards any of your scores. Now, as far as breaks go, you will get a 1-minute break between each section of the test, and after the 3rd section, you will get an optional 10-minute break. Alright, now let's take a closer look at the quantitative and verbal sections. We'll begin with the quantitative sections. For each section, you will have 35 minutes to answer 20 questions. Now, the quantitative sections test a wide variety of mathematical concepts, but the good thing is that the topics are those you studied in elementary and secondary school. So you won't be tested on advanced topics such as calculus, complex numbers, and so on. Now, there are 5 kinds of questions in the quantitative section. First, there are quantitative comparison questions. Here you are given 2 quantities, and you must determine which of them is greater. The math sections also include multiple choice questions, where you're given a question and you must select the correct answer among 5 options. Another question type is the multiple choice select one or more answer choice question. Here you're given a mathematical question along with any number of answer choices, and your job is to indicate all correct responses to the question. To receive credit for this question type, you must select all of the correct answers, and no more. The next question type to discuss is the numeric entry question. Here you're not given any answer choices. Instead, you must enter your response directly into the box provided. The last question type is the data interpretation question. This question type features some kind of visual information, such as a graph, chart, or diagram, which you must use to answer 3, sometimes 4 questions. Alright, so that's a general overview of the quantitative sections on the GRE. In upcoming lessons, we'll examine these question types in much greater detail. Now let's examine the verbal sections. For each verbal section, you will have 30 minutes to answer 20 questions. There are 3 kinds of questions you will encounter in the verbal sections. The first question type we'll discuss is the text completion question. Here you are presented with a passage consisting of 1 to 5 sentences. The passage will have 1 to 3 blanks where a crucial word or phrase has been omitted. For each blank, you will have 3 to 5 answer choices consisting of words or short phrases. Your task is to use contextual clues to determine which word or phrase best fills each blank to create a coherent and meaningful passage. Another question type you'll find in the verbal reasoning sections is the sentence equivalence question. Here you're presented with a single sentence featuring 1 blank. Your task here is twofold. You must use contextual clues to determine which 2 words or phrases best fill the blank to create coherent, meaningful sentences, and just as importantly, the 2 resulting sentences must convey equivalent messages. Okay, the last question type to discuss is the reading comprehension question. Now, reading comprehension questions are a major component of the verbal sections of the GRE. In fact, about half of all questions will test your reading comprehension skills. Each reading comprehension question is based on a passage that may range in length from 1 paragraph to several paragraphs. The questions related to the passage can test a wide variety of skills, all of which are important for anyone involved in a graduate studies program. Now, there are 3 question types associated with reading comprehension. First, there's the multiple choice question, in which you must select 1 correct answer from 5 answer choices. Another question type is the multiple choice, select 1 or more answer choices question. These questions provide 3 answer choices, and you must select all of those that are correct. To receive credit for this question type, you must select all of the correct answers and no more. The last type of reading comprehension question is the select in-passage question. With this type of question, you're asked to identify a sentence within the passage that answers a given question. Okay, so that's a general overview of the verbal sections on the GRE. In upcoming lessons, we'll examine each question type in much greater detail. Now let's spend some time examining some features of the GRE test interface. To begin, the interface allows you to skip questions, return to questions, and even change your responses to questions within the section you're working on. The test interface also has a mark function that allows you to tag a question in case you want to return to it later if time permits. This tagging feature works nicely with the review function, which provides a single table outlining which questions have been answered, which questions are remaining, and which questions have been tagged. Finally, the test interface has an on-screen calculator that's available during the quantitative sections of the test. Now, there's a lot of information to cover about this feature, so we've made a separate lesson on this. Okay, so now that we've discussed the various sections of the GRE, as well as the test interface, let's talk about the scores you'll receive. First, there's an analytical writing score between 0 and 6 that's given in half-point increments. There's also a verbal score between 130 and 170 in 1-point increments, and there's a quantitative score between 130 and 170 in 1-point increments as well. Now, on test day, right after you complete the exam, you'll receive your unofficial verbal and quantitative scores. Your official score report will be delivered within 10 to 15 days of taking the test. This report will have your verbal and quantitative scores as well as your analytical writing score. Finally, it's worth noting that your GRE scores are valid for 5 years from the time you take your test. Alright, so that's a brief overview of the GRE. As you'll soon see in other lesson modules, we have many videos that explore these topics in much greater detail.